lot to try to partner with organizations to elevate the culture here in Ottawa. And I think that, you know, one of the things that we've been discussing, it's an area that I don't work in within Shopify, but we've been discussing how we can get the word out more about the types of activities that people can do when they move here. So when a candidate decides, say, to come and join us for 5 days and check out the city, I want to make sure that everybody in our office knows where to take them, you know, from whether it be the Jazz Fest or, you know, Chamber Fest. Like, we want to be able to take them to the various places that will show them what their families' lives could be like working here. And then when they actually move here, making sure they can access these kind of cultural events as well, so that they actually end up staying, which is a key piece as well.
And just further to that, getting the word out is certainly one of the roles where the festival industry knows we can contribute. We currently have the largest social media, local cultural social media footprint, so happy to continue to play a leadership role there. We've also continued to have ongoing conversations with partners like Ottawa Tourism. The festival industry, as many of you are well aware, crosses a tourism divide and the cultural tourism divide. So, you know, we would be open to more discussions about how we can play a role in that particular space.
I'm looking forward to seeing the music strategy come out, and I think we're launching that sometime in February to talk about some of the things that we can do on at least the music side, but all of our cultural pursuits are going to be critical to address. If I may, you may not have the number directly at hand, but I believe that arts organizations have talked to the city about the leverage that investment by the city can create. Can you address that, or if you don't have the numbers on hand, that's okay?
Sure, I can speak to that. So the festival industry, we know, raises $27 to every $1 that the city invests. And the cultural industry can raise up to $12 per every dollar invested.
That's it's a stunning figure, and I don't think it even begins to address the economic advantage when it comes to talent retention, where it's extremely difficult to put a number on it. Thanks for your delegation today. Thank you very much, Chair.
Thank you very much, Councillor Leeper. Councillor Brockington.
And basically, it just shows that the city solution is not the best solution. I offered 13 options that were better solutions. And I'm glad Councillor DeRose is here, because I've been told by councillors I've been working with that he has a good business mind and he understands business cases to a great degree. So basically what I did was I just created, it didn't take very long, but I came up with, this is just a quick summary. I have 13 industry standard ground coverings, and I created a cost for them. I costed them out, and I also did a qualitative scoring on each option. For the qualitative side, some people say, well, business cases are all money. Well, they're not. They're quality as well. Here's some rated criteria I used. I said, well, the covering out in that front lawn should be able to cover the wheel traffic and the pedestrian traffic that it's being exposed to. It should be permeable. That means green, environmentally friendly, that it'll absorb water. And it also should be aesthetically pleasing. It should correspond or complement the Confederation Park. So there should be some green in it. So when you saw the qualitative version, it was based on this criteria. Now what I did was for each, I don't expect you to read this one. For each option, I did a 20-year analysis, which the city didn't do for their one alternative that they proposed. Here's a little close-up. What I did was a costing, which the city doesn't usually do. It goes out 20 years, and I used constant year dollars. I escalated the dollar value by the actual performance of the service or the good. And then I came up with budget year dollars for each for the next 20 years. And then from there, I took it down to discount rate so I can get a present value. I'm not sure if everybody's familiar with this, but again, Councillor DeRose is, when you're doing a long-term costing, you bring everything down to present value so you can do an apple-to-apple comparison. And that's what I did, basically. And this was a result. We see the status quo, $463,000. That's the first line. The patio stones or paving stones that they want to put in is more expensive. It's going to be $538,000, and it only has a qualitative factor of 53. As we go down, I looked at artificial grass, but what we came up with was those two highlighted ones, the plastic grids and the permeable interlock concrete segments. So what we saw there is they meet the requirements 100% of what the city wants from that front lawn, and they do it a lot cheaper. In fact, it's about half the price for the permeable concrete. So essentially, what we're looking at, I'll leave that up for you in case you want. Two things here. First of all, at the small level, at the micro level, the committee basically accepted that report, and now the city staff are going to carry on and do what they've been always doing, and they are going to explore the expensive option. The committee didn't do anything. In their silence, they basically endorsed what the city wanted to do on their recommendations. And this is not unique to this committee. At the macro level, I started out with hybrid buses. There was no business case for that, things like that.
Mr. Pindus, you have about 10 seconds to wrap up.
So basically, for this committee and other committees, you should ask the city to do business cases properly so that you can make informed decisions. And I see that for the last 6 years. They're not being asked.
Thank you very much. Are there any questions for the delegation? Seeing none, we'll move along to Ketchia Dorsainville from the Caribbean Union of Canada and Cesar Nadima Musa. Good afternoon. You have 5 minutes. Go ahead.
Good afternoon, Chair, Madam Chair, councillors. We thank you for the opportunity to comment on the 2018 city budget. My name is Ketchia Dorsainville-Peters, CEO of Caribbean Union of Canada. I'm here with our President, Cesar de Mamusa, to address the vital importance of funding our cultural appropriate program titled It's a Trap. In the potential of a $500,000 on-ramp funding, or asking of funding is in a city of Ottawa, which is being traumatized in its very recent history by homicide and violence in youth that are from visible minority and other backgrounds. We already run a pilot presentation at the Ottawa Technical High School in Vanier, in which an unexpected strong impact came from many other youth, not just minority youth, but also white youth, showing the changing face of Ottawa and the connection of all youth and communities in this great city that we live in. Cultural appropriate programs are not only impacting the Black youth and communities, they are positively impacting all youth and communities. I leave it to our president to continue explaining to our council the importance of funding such programs.
Thank you for having me. And before starting, I'd just like to congratulate the City of Ottawa and Crime Prevention Ottawa regarding their efforts to curb what has been, such as in 2016, rise in terms of homicides and youth crime. However, the reason we are here is not because the Caribbean Union of Canada claims to have the panacea but works towards solutions. You have heard many other organizations come here talk about issues such as you often heard regarding, for example, housing, regarding fundings. And we work with many of these organizations, such as even right here, some of these people are people that we work with among you, some of you councillors. Now, we have to be aware of the fact that when we talk in terms of youth and youth crime, and we talk about intervention, crime prevention, but also we have to address family preservation, because if on a macro level, I can talk about the Ottawa Anti-Black Racism Report, I can talk about the Ottawa Gang Strategy, I can talk about the United Nations Decade of African People. On a micro level, in terms of the reality, I have to talk about such a thing as a shooting that happened in Caldwell, a shooting that happened in front of children, a shooting that happened in the very community in broad daylight, which was the 11th homicide of 2017 in the city of Ottawa, that is too often talked of as being boring, but a city which is our city, which we must claim. And for that, when we're asking for $100,000, the sum may seem quite high to some, but all the statistics report that it costs over $100,000 for one inmate a year. We are asking for a program that's $100,000 to have access in all high schools in Ottawa, all the district school boards, in order to bring the awareness to the youth, an awareness that's brought by specialists and people who have lived their life. The pilot project that we ran already had a former homeless youth. It had a black man who had been incarcerated for 10 years regarding gang life. We also have a survivor of sex trafficking, but also to prevent them from entering or even considering their life by showing them the perspectives and the choices that can come. When our CEO, Ketia Peters, ran that pilot project, one of the big surprises that we had was the implication of white youth. Why? Because in this 21st century multicultural Ottawa, the white kids that are too often talked about in the news regarding opioids also have black friends. They have friends from Africa, from Haiti, from Jamaica, and they are also being witnesses to the destruction that is happening because of the fact of a lack in terms of culturally appropriate program and a certain sensitivity that requires for our own people to address the issues. So this is the reason why we are here, to address you, the reason why we seek for the City of Ottawa budget of 2018 to give us this amount so that we can better deliver and we can truly and truthfully have this Ottawa that we desire. Thank you very much.
And thank you very much. You were right on 5 minutes. Are there any questions for the delegations? No? We appreciate you being here. We'll move on then to our next speaker, Lorna Lime from the Community Mediation Ottawa, followed by Meet Pamir.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair and committee members. Thank you very much for this opportunity to address the committee. As the Madam Chair said, my name is Lorna LeMay, and I am the director of a community mediation program in the City of Ottawa called Community Mediation Ottawa. I'm here wearing 4 hats today, so that's going to be a bit of a juggle, but I'll try to be clear about the different hats. So hat number 1 is the community mediation organization that I run, which has absolutely no funding, 0 funding. And what we do is we deliver conflict coaching, mediation services, group dialogues and interventions, and training to folks in the community, marginalized folks in the community who find themselves in conflict or in need of capacity building to avoid conflict or deal with conflict, and they don't have any types of funding or access to support to be able to do that. So we run all of these programs. They are all run with trained volunteers that are trained to a provincial standard. We have almost 100 volunteers that work for our organization and delivering and giving back to the community in this way. So that's sort of hat number 1, 0 funding. I just came back from our annual general meeting. We're part of a provincial group that sets standards for this type of work across the province in various different cities. We are the only one, I was quite dismayed to realize, that has absolutely no city support in any way. Every last one of our sister and brother organizations has city funding. I'll give you an idea where we get our referrals from. We get a lot of referrals from community housing. We deal in many of the community housing buildings where we will go in and capacity build and help the folks within the community understand inclusivity and facing conflict and being together as a community in a positive way. So we do that. We do that with the community housing staff as well as all of the folks within the buildings. In fact, we have also been called in, I believe we have a request from Councillor Leeper right now to go into a building and do some work with you. So we've had many ward councillors reach out to us and say, could you help us with a community dialogue around a particular issue in my ward? So we do a lot of that work. And again, it's all on the backs of volunteers for free to the community. So the third hat that I wear, a second one is as a member of the provincial organization. The third hat that I wear is we have launched a coalition in the city, and it's called the ORCC, so it's the Ottawa Restorative Community Coalition. What we've done is we started with about a dozen organizations. We are now 24 and counting, of organizations across the city that build capacity in the community at the grassroots level, the front lines of the community, whether it be in restorative justice, whether it be in conflict resolution, whatever the needs of the community are at the grassroots, that is what we do. And we've brought ourselves together as a coalition to make sure we're not duplicating efforts, to tap into our own resources, to build strength as a group, as an advocacy group, and to look for opportunities. We've gone ahead and identified gaps in the system, and we're in the process of preparing 6 to 8 different project presentations that we are going to be looking for funding for that will close existing gaps in the system within the city. We work a lot with Ottawa Police. We've just formalized our partnership with them, and we take referrals from them for doing work in the community as well, from the community police officers. So far, we've done almost 40 referrals from the police where we have resolved them peacefully, allowing the police officers to go and do police-type work. Come January, this work is going to be launched with all of the frontline police officers. So not just the community police officers, but all of the frontline officers have our referral cards in their black books and constantly refer cases and situations to us, where we can resolve an issue without having to engage in the system, whether it be the judicial system, bylaw, or anything else. I think just the final thing is, in terms of funding, we need to keep our doors open. We've proven that we are delivering a valuable service. We have statistics every which way you can imagine that we can share. The value is there. The needs are there. Bringing a coalition together, we feel, is one way to increase our voice and increase the services that we can provide without any duplication. So sustainable funding is certainly one thing, but also project-based funding. So we're really here for an opening for both. Thank you.
And thank you very much. There's some questions, starting with Councillor Eglai.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just following up on your comment about the work you're doing with Ottawa Police. And essentially, it sounds like what you're doing is you're taking some of the issues that they're dealing with and resolving it in a different way, which I'm assuming frees up some of their resources, because are you compensated in any way by OPS for the work that you do in conjunction with them?
Not at all. This is the first stage of the program. What we wanted to do was demonstrate, set up the processes and the orientation of the officers, and actually demonstrate the value of the work that we can do. And there will definitely have to be an ask for funding, otherwise we will not be able to continue the work, especially once it gets rolled out to the entire front line of the force.
Well, yeah, that's sort of where I was going. I mean, so it's your intention, or the organization's intention, to make a formal ask to OPS to help fund this?
At some point, yes. It
Okay.
will be.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Egla. Councillor Leeper.
Thank you, Chair. Lorna, first, thank you very much for the work you do. I know my staff in the office have your number in the Rolodex as well. We use it frequently. You provide an invaluable service. How long have you been in operation?
We have been, as Community Mediation Ottawa, it's been 4 years. We were reconfigured. Again, it's that funding challenge of where do we go for funding. We've actually been in existence for more than a decade. It's just under sort of different models. And right now there is no funding model. We are literally sitting in an office that we borrow space from, and my position is slightly funded.
Okay, and that is what I want to understand a little bit better is, what is your sustainability outlook, and how do you need city funding in order to continue operating? Obviously, for 4 years you've been bootstrapping it and managing to keep things together. How much longer can you do that?
Given the referrals that we are now receiving, not much longer. We'll be lucky to make it through the next year.
So some sort of, and what level of funding is required to ensure that you are here for the midterm?
If you're talking about sustainable funding, we do have a full funding proposal that I would be happy to share, and that has all the details. It's really just a core funding of 2 FTEs that can actually run the office and the training programs and make sure that we deliver the service, especially to Ottawa Police Bylaw Office and Ottawa Community Housing. And the other things, we're quite happy to go on a project basis and actually look for grant funding as well to support some of the programs that we do. So we do need some funding to keep our doors open, for space to have our mediations and the dialogues and whatnot, but then also for specific programs that we're bringing together as part of a network to fill the gaps in the city.
And have you asked the city before for funding?
No, we have not.
Okay. Do you have any indication of how that request would be met today?
No.
Okay. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Leeper. Councillor Cackett.
Thank you, Chair, and Councillor Leeper sort of covered some of the questions or direction that I was going with, and I'm just curious as to the sources of your funding now. Are they from grants from the Community Foundation or other sources that we've heard from some of the other groups? And why do you feel at this time that you need to come to the city? Is it because you're seeing more and more of your resources eating up? I know you're at St. Paul's, I think, in terms of your headquarters. Are you free in terms of the room that you have there?
Yes.
And I'm just wondering again in terms of the revenues or grants that you have coming in, where that's coming. And from what I understand, the mediators that you have are all volunteer-based. So if you can just talk a bit more about the operations aspect as well.
Absolutely. So the support, the financial support that we have right now actually comes through the Canadian Institute for Conflict Resolution, part of it. They donate some money in terms of my position. They donate the space, which is in partnership with St. Paul University. The rest of it is through fundraising that we do, and also through some private donations, which are very, very small. That doesn't even cover the training that we do to train mediators. I have a roster of about 50 volunteer mediators that are trained to provincial standards. Most of them, the vast majority of them, are mediators by profession, who have either retired or simply want to give back to the community by continuing to do this good work. So there's about 50 of them. We have about 25 folks who are trained in conflict coaching, who again give time back to the community doing conflict coaching. And then I also have a group of trainers and facilitators who do group dialogues and training work with frontline workers, so social workers. You'll often see us in a resource center training the frontline program staff to better deal with the conflicts they're faced in, just in the line of their work. So that's sort of the pieces that we do. So the funding we actually run right now based on $30,000 a year. That's it. And that's by the grace of the Institute and some private donations.
Okay, and so what is the number that you need in order to?
200,000 a year.
Okay, and the space at St. Paul's, is that at market value, or is that given
We have that secured for the next 3 years.
Okay. And in terms, you mentioned that you've sort of been there for 4 years, but 10 as well. Can you explain that, and can you explain how the numbers have either gone up or down over that last 10 years in terms of the demand?
Yes. I was actually brought in 3 years ago to build the organization, and I did it through partnerships. Built a partnership strategy and went around to the community and all the points of referral that could benefit from the services of the organization. And this is where the partnership with Ottawa Police came, with Ottawa Community Housing, with Bylaw Services, with 211. So we've gone around and built these points of referral. With that, we have seen a 60% increase in calls coming in, and we've seen a 70% increase in completed successful mediations. When I first started, we had about 50 or 60 mediations a year. Now we're nearing the 200 mark. And that's just in mediations, that's not in workshops and training.
Okay. Okay, thank you very much for that.
You're welcome.
I have passed your contact informations to people as well in the past, so thank you for the work that you're doing as well.
You're welcome.
Thank you. Any other questions? Seeing none, thank you for your presentation. Next, we will hear from Meet Pamir, followed by Kimberly Mann. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon, Chair. Good afternoon, councillors. My name is Mete Pamir. I'm a resident of Bayshore neighborhood, and I would like to share my thoughts with the committee today regarding how to increase access to healthy food in our city. I'm not here to represent an organization. I'll be speaking as a community volunteer and resident to share my growing concern for the absence of on-ramp funding for organizations that are not currently receiving funds from the city. I would urge the committee to be bold in putting forward a vision to support emergent organizations that offer multiple social and health benefits while they increase food access in our city. These observations are mainly anchored in Bayshore neighborhood. This is the community I've lived for the last 16 years. It's a community with many challenges for low-income families, as we have heard earlier today. This is putting great pressure on access to affordable food. At the same time, the neighborhood has unique strengths of cultural diversity and high level of education. In a sense, the community reflects the rich potential of its residents, as well as the many ways in which social policies so far are failing our residents. While most of these policies are outside the scope of the city, to be fair, there is a lot that the city can do to facilitate progress in ways that will generate most positive outcomes with the least spending, such as in the area of increasing food access. Most importantly, the city initiatives around food have great multiplier effects. They increase community cohesion, engagement, and unleash the energy of creative solutions to persistent problems. For the last 6 years, I'm actively volunteering and organizing in neighborhood initiatives such as the Bayshore Community Garden, the Community Oven, the Street Foods Collective, and to share a brief observation based on the experience of these projects. What has started as additional means of increasing food access outside the regular food bank channels has evolved into partnerships and cooperation with peer organizations working in other communities and citywide. The result has been an active contribution to an expanding network of peers in our city that are passionate about healthy food. Groups working on new ways of growing food, teaching about food, preparing, sharing, and marketing food. The spin-offs in terms of placemaking, the nutritional, social, and educational benefits were most surprising and positive in our volunteer experience. Our initiatives benefited greatly from the organizations that were directly or indirectly funded by the city: Just Food and Community Gardening Network for our garden, Better Neighborhoods program of the city back in 2013 for our community oven, and the wide-ranging support we have been receiving from PQ Community Health Center in garden, oven, and street food collective projects. Later, for several events and ongoing support, we have relied on platforms offered by Market Mobile, Hidden Harvest, Ottawa Incubator Kitchen, Parkdale Food Center, Food Share Ottawa, just to name a few of the emergent organizations that I'm drawing the committee's attention. This is the huge potential of these like-minded groups that I would like to speak today, and I'm speaking today. Between the established organizations that receive city funding and community initiatives that are fostered by the existing funding, there are middle-range and grassroots organizations that kickstart creative ways to respond to issues. Some of these issues are new and emerging, some are perennial and need new approaches in addition to established ways. To put it very shortly, we do need the food banks for acute crisis, but we also need a vision to foster new organizations beyond their startup phases, programs that need to be complemented by inventive ways of growing, sharing, marketing local, fresh, and minimally processed food. I would like to urge the city to be bold and visionary, perhaps not in the dollar amounts at the initial stage, but in setting up a framework to promote innovation in our city at the grassroots level when it relates to food access. Once the vision and framework is in place, our experience in one underprivileged neighborhood shows that the middle-range organizations will have multiple nutritional and social engagement effects. With these thoughts, I would like to ask the committee, firstly, to establish a new on-ramp fund to support groups that address new and emerging needs. Secondly, to find the resources for this new fund without making any cuts from the proposed sustainable funds for social service agencies. And thirdly, to set up a mechanism to invite and prioritize the initiatives of these new organizations by involving residents in the process. In short, I would like to suggest that you present a vision for the coming wave of organizations that offer creative solutions to the perennial problems of healthy food access in our city.
Thank you very much. I'm just going to jump in because we've passed the 5-minute mark, but thank you for your presentation. I'll just see if there are any questions. Councillor Nussbaum.
Thank you, Mr. Vice Chair. Just a quick comment to thank you for coming this afternoon and for speaking on behalf of those groups. I think food security is exactly the area that we could see a benefit for if we were to find the funds for some sort of on-ramp funding. There's some great, exciting work happening throughout the city on food literacy, on growing food, on cooking food, whether it's the Parkdale Food Center, Mobile Market, others. So I think it was really important to hear from you, and I thank you for coming this afternoon.
Good. Further questions? Thank you for coming. Next, we will hear from Kimberly Mann, the Collaborative Justice Program. Is Kimberly Mann in the gallery? Once, twice, Kimberly Mann? Okay, we'll move on. Speaker number 40, Tara Upreti. I was told she might have left as of 2:30. Tara Upreti, Canada-Nepal Solidarity for Peace? No? Okay, we'll continue. Next is Chloe de Rivière. Following Ms. de Rivière will be Christine Ledman. Okay, we'll get that set up. So welcome, bienvenue. You have 5 minutes.
Perfect. I'm Chloe Desrivières-Poitevin, and I'm a PhD candidate at Carleton University working with Drs. Trish Belamingi and Irina Knezevich on a Social Science Humanities Research Council Insight Grant project called the Social Economy of Food. And we did a case study on Hidden Harvest. And I'm here in support of Hidden Harvest, describe some of the impacts of their work in Ottawa. So some of the benefits. So Jay Garlow and Katrina Six are the founders of Hidden Harvest, and one of the things that we found throughout our research with them is that they see profit of the profit generated by Hidden Harvest. So any funds generated by the organization as a means to an end, and this end is to ensure social good. So profits are redistributed throughout the community, and currently they're a ways away from achieving profitability, but they nevertheless distribute the bounties reaped from the harvest throughout the community in a number of ways. So firstly, this would be community building. So harvests are not only an opportunity for people to access free fruits and nuts, and also help to collect fresh, nutritious foods for local food agencies. So harvests are also community building events in which people from particular geographic areas come together to learn, collect, and appreciate local foods. Equally, harvests provide educational opportunities in which volunteers learn about and come to appreciate trees and urban ecosystems. So they're also reconnecting with their natural environment. Hidden Harvest further aims to develop knowledge by offering a slew of food skills workshops where people can learn how to use and preserve the foods that they gather. In these ways, Hidden Harvest aligns itself with principles of food sovereignty, so even beyond food security and community food security, by providing meaningful connections to food, increasing the social, cultural, economic, and food value of urban ecologies, and increasing people's control over their food systems. So it is a multi-pronged approach to food issues. So they're not just about collecting and redistributing food, but they're also about educating and developing the community around this. So here, food is not just a means to an end, it's a part of the solution. So there are a number of challenges, the first of which is securing annual funding to support their harvests. So like many social enterprises, Hidden Harvest faces struggles in ensuring funding to support their operating costs and to grow and to be able to harvest all the trees that they've been able to map throughout the city. Despite these challenges, Hidden Harvest is an incredibly innovative and creative enterprise, and this is allowing them to develop and grow despite their funding challenges. For instance, their tech-savvy approach to harvest lowers their operating costs and has allowed them to create a harvest-centered social network of sorts. And in harnessing this creativity, there are a number of opportunities to ensure the continued success and growth of Hidden Harvest. They use social and visual media to enhance their partnerships with other urban harvest organizations and to help grow through their sharing knowledge and key lessons on operations, organization, and funding. So our project at the moment, we're looking at some of the wider benefits of Hidden Harvest. So we see them as an example of a community economy, which is, to briefly describe it, a more than capitalist economy. So looking beyond profit and economic value towards social good. So this idea of sharing profit and profit as the social good again. And Hidden Harvest we see as an building towards organic community relations. So built on shared interests, shared learning opportunities. And it allows people to connect with place in participating in community building processes and connecting with ecosystems and reconceptualizing this idea of surplus. So surplus food is seen oftentimes as waste, so they're reconceptualizing the surplus as actual edible food. And I have been to numerous Hidden Harvest occasions, and it's actually really hard to attend a harvest because there's so many people who want to go, and there's not enough trees to meet the demand at the moment. So an increase in funding would allow more people who want to participate in harvests to participate. And if I'll go back a slide.
We just need to wrap up. You have about 15, 20 seconds.
They're incredibly So as Jay was describing, they're incredibly diverse. There's lots of opportunities for people of all abilities to participate. So lots of different tasks for people who have mobility issues, for young children. So, yeah.
Thank you very much for your presentation and for your work. Any questions for the delegate? Seeing none, thank you very much for coming down today. Appreciate it. We have 2 speakers left on my list. Next is Christine Ledman, followed by Heather Stetcher, I believe. Ms. Ledman? Christine Ledman, last call. All right. Heather Stetcher? Good afternoon to you. Yes. Could you just press the microphone button so we can hear you? There you go. That's great. You have 5 minutes.
What to press?
Oh, you had it.
My sound guy go. Press it again. Oh, like there. That'll work. As you all know, my name is Heather Stetcher, and I am one of the wonderful beneficiaries of a housing subsidy. I was very lucky because I got my housing subsidy after 2 years. Many families are told they may have to wait 5 years, some even 10 years. That's too long, period. All you're doing by making them wait that long is putting more stress on them, and we all know what stress does to our health and makes them more vulnerable because they are making more choices every month about which bills they're not going to pay so they can keep a roof over their mouth, over their head. So it's really important to put back the $400 million of housing money. The second thing I'll talk about is the ramp-up money. I live in a food desert. I live in Strathcona Heights, and it is at least 2 buses to get to any grocery store, and those are usually the most expensive grocery stores. So they're not grocery stores that I can use most of the time because I live on ODSP. And so it's really important that we have Market Mobile and a food bank in our community so that we get better food. The Market Mobile, in particular, does not, to my knowledge, get any stable city funding. The ramp-up funding that we've been recommending is extremely important to keep people healthy. During the winter, when you have disabilities, getting out of the house is a challenge and often doesn't happen. So it's really important that good food comes to you in terms of the Market Mobile. It makes every difference. We're also trying to attract a grocery store to our community, but that's a different discussion. Something else I'd like to mention is I've been in this building probably 3 times over the last 2 weeks. The first time I went by to see the accessibility office, which, as long as I have lived in Ottawa, has been where Service Canada and Service Ontario is, and the planning department, right beside the planning department. They're not there anymore. I have gone 3 times to the information desk, and they haven't been able to figure it out. Now, this gives a very bad message to those of us with disabilities who make use of the Accessibility Office often to report various problems around the city. Now, it seems to be hidden to talk to them or to get to them. I don't know what has happened, but something needs to be done to make them back where, if not where they were, at least in a place where we know where they are and we can get to them easily and quickly. I've reported several problems in this city, which the city didn't create, but I was almost run over on Rideau Street by a bus because the construction in Barbara Market didn't have a flagger that day, and they had this big truck that jutted into the lane, and I was almost hit and run over. So these things happen sometimes, and being able to report them as soon as possible and accurately and quickly and easily is important. Just a thought. Those are the most urgent issues, I think. So I appreciate your time. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Heather. Are there any questions for the delegation? Seeing none, that ends the public delegation portion. Oh, we never got it, but come on up, Trevor. I'll give you the last word. You too? Okay, so we will take you next, but we don't have it. Oh, is there nobody out there? No. Okay, we'll take care of that administrative issue. I think it's because of lack of staff. Okay.
Good afternoon. Thank you, Madam Chair. So very quickly, it's my understanding that the City of Ottawa used to have a housing policy planner. I don't know that person's name, but apparently he retired 4 years ago. And since that time, his position has not been replaced. I assume if he were to be replaced, it would be related to this budget for your department. We want to argue strongly in favor of the idea that someone needs to take the lead here at City Hall on ensuring that transit-oriented developments prioritize social housing in the City of Ottawa. Otherwise, we're going to see a situation where the property values around the light rail transit stations rapidly increase. They are already rising. And we're going to see gentrification and urban displacement of some of our most vulnerable citizens. And so I just wanted to quickly ask Madam Chair and the members of this committee if something could be done to see within existing budgets, if someone on staff could be assigned to take a leadership role on this subject, to break down silos between the planning department, the transportation department, and those folks here at City Hall who deal with social housing, and try to make some real leadership on this issue, because we do know there's more capital funding available now for building more social housing, and it would really be great if that could be prioritized to be built in close proximity to the light rail transit station, because we know the city's taking on considerable debt to build that new light rail system, which is wonderful. But how is the community going to benefit from that system? And we really want to ensure that we're not seeing situations where people are facing urban displacement. So that's what I'm asking for. I don't think it would require new money. Maybe people could do it within their existing envelopes and just assign a point person. We need someone in the leadership role to do that and to make it a priority. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Hache. And I have to say, I agree with you. I actually raised this at a committee last week that through the whole Salvation Army exercise, it became apparent to me that one of the staff positions we don't have in this corporation anymore is the social planner. And clearly, that's something that we would all benefit from. So thank you for raising that with us today. Are there any questions? Seeing none, the next two speakers are on childcare, and since I've declared a conflict on childcare, I'm going to turn the chair over to Vice Chair Brockington. No.
So good afternoon. Are you speaking together or individually?
I don't know how to do this. I think we can do it together.
Okay.
One after the other, please. Thank
So go ahead.
Hi there. My name is Sylvia Simpson, and I work at Centertown Daycare. Centertown Daycare has been in business for 42 years, and I've been there for almost 40 of them. More importantly, though, I am a parent and a grandparent. As parents, there are some very important questions that we ask ourselves when it comes to our little ones. And although some may seem trivial, we can assure you that they are in fact critically important. Who will wash their hands if they need help? Who will be patient with them on grumpy Monday mornings? Who will teach them how to share with others? Who will help them sort out a problem, make sure that they're properly dressed for outside, and make sure that they feel safe and loved? Or more importantly, who can step in and do our most important job while we're away working? And the simple answer is whoever does that job best. Without a doubt, our children are going to be the single greatest investment of our lives, and we want them to have the greatest opportunities out there, and why shouldn't we? Unfortunately, when it comes to their education and care, we cannot bear this cost alone. We can't bear this cost alone because we're not talking about one individual that takes care of our children while we're away. We're talking about an entire team. A team of working individuals that are available to us Monday through Friday and no less than 10 hours a day.
My name is Carla Tomlinson. I'm a longtime child care educator at Wellington Child Care Center down the street from here. I'm speaking on behalf of, obviously, the center I belong to, as well as the parents and the community that access the center. Since the freeze of subsidy spaces in 2016, our center has really felt the impact. Most of the families that we service come from a marginalized sector and definitely require those subsidies. When the subsidies became unfrozen, which was, it went from September of 2016 to the end of March 2017, we weren't seeing a rejuvenation of families being allowed to attend our centers. When we started speaking to these families, the information that was shared was that, you know, they were given the permission to come and look at our centers, but if they wanted a subsidized space, they needed to go to a city-run municipal center only, and that's where their subsidy would be fulfilled. The impact to all of the centers in the downtown core has been quite strong. Centers have had to lay off staff, and many families, the worst part of it is that families are not able to access these empty spaces because the city is not offering up subsidies for them to go to work and school. So that's why we're here today, and we really want to speak on behalf of our communities. We've been in the downtown core for over 40 years. Both of us have been in the service for over 35, and we do not want to see these services go away. And we thank you so much for your time and allowing us here at the end. Thank you.
Well, let me thank you as well. Thank you for your presentation. I'll just see if there are any questions for you. Councillor McKenney.
Thank you, Vice Chair, and thank you for coming out. We will be asking staff to respond to some of the very valid concerns that you've raised, and we've heard them for months now, and from more than one center. So we will be asking staff to respond to some of the issues that you've raised. Thank you. Thanks for coming out.
Thank you.
Thank you again. Has anyone signed up who has not yet had an opportunity to speak at the committee today? Anyone? Okay. So I declare that portion of this meeting now complete, and I'll turn the chair back over to Chair Deans.
Okay. Thank you, Councillor Brockington. And just let me start by saying thank you to all of the delegations who came out today. I think for all of us to hear from so many people about so many pressing issues in our community is a good reminder of the people in this neighborhood, in this city, that really need our help. And you know, I've said this before and I'll say it again, I really think it's our duty to ensure that we're helping the most vulnerable citizens in our community. And I think we had a very strong demonstration today of the need that exists in the community, and I think that we really need to find ways to help. And we certainly heard plenty about whatever you want to call it, on-ramp funding, project funding, the needs of so many organizations that have been kept out of a funding stream in the city for a long time, and that you know, really can't wait any longer. And as much as I know that there's to be a social services review next year, it doesn't address the immediate need. And I really feel between now and council, we need to find a way to address that need. And when you have an organization like the Social Planning Council coming and offering to match our funding, I felt like we were in the Dragon's Den. It's like, I'll take that deal, because we need the help. We need to find a way to get this done. I pitched this, as the chair of this committee, I pitched it to the mayor and city manager during our run-up to this budget, and I'm disappointed it's not in the budget. It needs to be in the budget. We need to find a way to get it in the budget. So we're going to go to questions to staff, and we'll start with Councillor Brockington.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and again, thank you to our treasurer and assistant treasurer, finance staff, all general managers for their efforts to get this budget before us, and for the members of the community who have come out today to share their thoughts and concerns with us, and for other members who have participated in other committee meetings. It's 3:30, so I will do my best to keep my questions short and to the point. I wanted to, just like every committee, Madam Chair, my questions are going to be touching upon a number of areas under this committee's portfolio. So I'll start with paramedics, and I'd like to talk about what is being proposed in this budget as far as the addition of FTEs and net increase in 2018. There have been investments within the last year to address the shortage of FTEs that the city has had, and to respond to particularly the response times that had fallen. And so I asked the general manager, through you, Madam Chair, the FTEs that are being incorporated into the budget, I think we can agree are necessary. What is the GM's thoughts on whether this is sufficient? Is the number that has been proposed by staff the number because that's what we can afford? Or is the number being proposed by staff the actual number that will get us to the equilibrium that we need as a city to provide emergency services to our residents?
Chair, I'll ask Chief Cassidy to come up and maybe also add some comments if he wishes. But as the councillor indicated, we had fallen behind. This committee worked with us to look at the challenges we had, and in a very short period now, we'll have added, if these 14 are added to the complement, added 50 overall in this term of council, and 10 vehicles. What I can tell you, and I'll let Chief Cassidy talk more in detail if you wish, as he indicated, we have now gotten back on track. We are now meeting the standard that this committee and council approved of 8-minute response at the 75th percentile for all CTAS 1 or the most critical calls. We've met that. We're now there with the resources that have been added. The analysis that we have of the growth of this year and likely the growth of next half year, the additional 14 will maintain us there. So I'm comfortable that the standard that you've set for us, we've now caught up, and the additional 14 will ensure that for the rest of this year's growth and next year's growth until those additional 14 are on, we'll maintain that.
And you believe there's a direct correlation between the added number of FTEs and better response times. It's not because the weather's been better, because the construction maybe from one year to another. I tend to agree with you, but I want to make sure after only analyzing 6 to 9 months that we have enough time to make that conclusion. But you're fairly confident going into 2018 that we are at where we need to be at.
I am, Chair, and those issues that you indicate, whether it's weather, whether it's construction, and you did mention the very busy and challenging year from an emergency response capability of our 2017 activities that also added to that. We're also included in that, but I'll turn over to Chief Cassidy if he has any additional comments he'd like to add.
Thank you, Mr. Monte. Good afternoon. I don't have a lot to add to that. The statistics that are gathered are on a macro level. They are, we think, sufficient to make those determinations. They're over months and various seasons. So I'd echo the assessment by the GM.
Thank you. Madam Chair, through you to the GM of Parks and Recreation, we heard a delegation today from Gotta Go to talk about the benefits, quality of life benefits of having accessible washrooms, not only at transit stations, but in some of our more neighborhood parks. Could I just hear a response from staff? Is there a plan to try and incorporate more accessible washrooms, particularly in our green spaces next year?
Chair, yes, there is. The city currently rents out every summer and installs about 100 portable toilets in parks across the city. About half of those are done directly by the city, and then the other half primarily through sports organizations, much like the Gotta Go group we're suggesting. And we do offer that service to all of our sports leagues, so they have the ability to contract through us, through one provider, to have units installed at their sites. Through discussions when this request came in earlier this year, we did agree that we would look at adding an incremental 10 units across the city, and we're going to look at a combination where they're most needed, but primarily where Gotta Go has identified sports fields as well as splash pads. And we're also going to look at an application through our older adult plan for funding to see if we can do 10 more at areas that are of particular high occupancy for older adults. And that is an application process that we submit several projects to, but we see this as another way to possibly add units in areas that are high need.
Excellent, thank you. Still with your portfolio, the budget outlines money for a needs assessment of the highly antiquated and much needed to be renovated or rebuilt pavilion at Mooney's Bay. Can you assure me that that assessment will actually occur in 2018?
Chair, yes, it is our intent to move on that this year. Most of our other work at Mooney's Bay has progressed well now, so I think it is time to tackle this. Our planning manager has now allocated work for the coming year, and that is definitely on our work plan for next year.
Good, good. Community will be very happy to be engaged in that process. If I could move over to bylaw in particular, Mr. DeMonte, with the pending legalization of marijuana at or around July 1st next year, what will bylaws role be with respect to shops which are not authorized or legal to sell? We, the city, have had challenges in addressing the illegal pot shops that exist now. There's a little chicken and egg, whether it's bylaw issue versus police issue. Certainly criminal code issues come into play, but is there any role for bylaw to play once this becomes legal, but we have outlets which are not the legalized entities to sell the product?
Chair, the Vice Chair's question is apropos. As this committee knows, the senior levels of government, both the federal and provincial government, now are starting to let us know, and we're starting to see the legislation as to where they're going with this. The Government of Ontario is doing a Crown Corporation like an LCBO, and they'll be set up. So fundamentally, that'll go through the normal planning process. We're going to be consulted. The city has set up the city manager asked actually me to lead a task force of city staff, and we've had several meetings as we're starting to analyze what those senior levels of government have started drafting as far as legislation. Directly to your question, and I'll turn it over to the bylaw director as well too for his comment if he wishes, but in simple terms, what will be legal, it'll be the Crown Corporation set up by the province of Ontario. We'll be chatting of where that'll be set up as they roll this out. The other thing that you'll be seeing is one will be able to get home delivery too through the official process. There will be no other legal entity that will exist, and our understanding is both the federal and provincial government are giving police services more tools, although they have several right now under the criminal code, to close the ones you're referring to, the illegal ones. So as it stands now, if one would project in time, and we stand to be corrected because you understand this is a moving file and there's a lot of details we don't have, there wouldn't be per se much role for bylaw officers. Now there's talk on the tobacco side or the use of the product. Are there tools that will be given to municipal law enforcement officers there? And I'll let Roger talk about that, but that's kind of like smoking bylaws and all that are being harmonized as well too. So Roger, maybe you can add some comment on that.
Yes, Chair. The only thing I can add, I guess, is about the, as GM DeMonte has mentioned, is the smoke-free bylaw. So our smoke-free bylaw currently would prohibit the use of marijuana in parks. I guess the question really is what legal authority will be given to regulate the common areas of apartment buildings and office buildings and things like that. So that's yet to be determined. So we're hoping that in the near future we'll have some answers to those questions, but at this point we don't really know.
Can I just underscore the importance that, and I said this at the Finance and Audit Committee of the Police Services Board, that your shop documents the time and resources that are being spent, particularly for the legalization of marijuana file, because if the province and feds are collecting tax revenues, they're getting something, and yet there are costs that municipalities have to incur because a higher level government has passed a law. We need to make a strong case and document what those costs are to our taxpayers so we can try and recoup some of that.
Chair, if I may encourage you, that is part of the work that staff are doing, and collectively the municipalities through the Federation of Canadian Municipalities are also documenting that at a national level to be able to make representations to the federal government, obviously, but we are doing that in concert with all our municipal colleagues, and particularly the finance team. So that is being undertaken as we speak too. And again, it's kind of a moving file, so a lot of this is, there's still not complete clarity, but we are assuring that we are documenting what we think some of our perceived costs may be.
Just my final question for now, Madam Chair, is on the same theme, but it's regarding the Syrian refugees that Ottawa welcomed over a year ago, and that is some of the major service providers in my ward who continue to provide services to some of our new residents of the city have indicated that the social needs, the medical and social needs that some of these refugees carry are much greater than what were expected, and that these agencies are now having to invest more resources with these refugees than expected. And so I'd like to ask, are these costs associated with the refugees in particular, there's net increases to those costs than what were previously budgeted. Is there any capacity to document these and say to the federal government, as much as we welcome and want to help and serve and help them integrate into society and deal with the various challenges that they may be faced with, that there were additional costs that were not anticipated and we're looking to offset some of those? Is that being addressed any further?
Madam Chair, I think that listening to the delegations today, they're reflecting a number of different pressures, from minimum wage to more complex needs, mental health, and housing, and the list goes on. I think that as part of the review, we can certainly try to identify what different pressures have been contributing to the needs in the community, and if there's any opportunity that, as a result of that analysis, reflects that there's another opportunity to engage another level of government in a very concrete way in terms of what we're finding in terms of the needs of the City of Ottawa, we can certainly do that.
Okay, good. Okay, Madam Chair, for now, I'll leave it there and listen to...
Thank you, Councillor Brockington. Conseiller Fleury.
Je vais débuter avec mes questions au niveau du service d'urgence.
I'll start about my questions with the emergency services, sir. With the paramedics, we have an increase of $4.6 million. And I thought that for each investment of $1 for paramedics, we were paying 50% of the fees that the province would paying back. So I thought the amount would have been over the $2 million increase. Could you enlighten me on this? Well, indeed, Madam Chair, we have 50% back from the province. And so the investment you made last year, you'll see in the budget 50% of what was spent, which would be paid back by the department. If you approve this budget, you'll add 14 new paramedics. For this year, the 6 months, you will pay 100% of that cost, but next year, the ministry will add their 50%. It's only because our fiscal years are not exactly the same as with the province. So we have the calendar year, and they have the year from March to April. So that's why, and it's standard. So at the end of the day, the investments you're making is 50% will be paid by the government of Ontario. Okay, you talked about the 14 paramedics that are planned here through these investments. Will the plan be effective from July 1st? Yes. Normally, as you know, our goal is that these people are graduates from the college here, and when they do graduate in the spring, usually in June, the process is over, people are hired, and it takes about a month to integrate them in the corporation, to our procedures, our policies, and then on July 1st, they'll be on the road, operating on the territory. And until then, as a council, we will maintain the percentages that, yes, one of your colleagues asked me the question in English. I can assure you that, and Chief Cassidy said it too, the investments you've made brought us back to our goal of 75% of response time to critical situation within 8 minutes. So we're back at that standard now. And the 14 additional is from the analysis we made regarding the increase in the number of calls that we get. And with these 14 additional paramedics, we're pretty sure that we will be able to maintain our operational standard. You don't have to check this, but there's a section for CCTV camera and the replacement. I do believe in the importance of having a safe infrastructure. Did you ever do an analysis on the opportunity, just like the London, to have these things in public spaces, high density, in high density area like Lansdowne and Byward Market? If so, could you share that with us? Madam Chair, I'll ask my colleague, Mr. Poirier, to answer this question Of course, we looked at it, but he can give you more details. We talked to the police department too. And of course, in a democratic society, the idea that the state would be spying is not too welcome. But we know that London and in other cities in the world, it is an additional tool. But Mr. Poirier will give you more details on this. Madam Chair, we've looked at what was going on in London and elsewhere, and right now we will be bringing a policy to the committee, I hope, in the spring 2018. And we will have more information on this issue, and we can discuss this idea to see if we want to have public surveillance like this.
House fees. And I hope that when you come back to committee, we have a wholesome discussion, because I know that building code's involved, bylaw staff's involved. I know that some member of Janice's team's involved. I think there's some issues, there's some gaps there that everyone's throwing the ball at each other. So I just wanted to raise that, in my mind, the conformity to building code services and property standards and other bylaws should be our primary focus in this license objective. So maybe more of a statement on that front. The other one is the, so I'll move on to the Housing Social Services Group. Janice, if you're okay with that. Janice, maybe on page 69, there's under the housing section that says there's an additional $3.8 million. Can you just run us through what those additional dollars will achieve?
So I'll just turn the question over to Shelley Van Buskirk. She's the Director of Housing Services. That's the $3.7 million?
Yeah, I
Okay.
rounded up to 3.8.
Okay. So there was a loss of funding of $1.3 million from the federal government. And as you recall, it's legislated by the province. And those, they impose certain indices in terms of social housing. And that was another $1.7 million pressure that was absorbed by the city.
What does that pressure force us to do, or what does it do? What are we not achieving? Like, I'm confused as to what these dollars go towards.
So the way that the social housing is set up under the Housing Services Act is that every single year they look at a series of indices related to things like utilities, mortgages, insurance, and those sorts of things, and they set certain percentages of increases. And it's legislated, and the City of Ottawa must pay those. So that's on the social housing side from the province's perspective, and that's a pressure of $1.7 million. Then the other $1.3 million, as we've talked about here before at committee, is over the years we had benefited from about $32 million in federal funding. That is slowly eroding, and we've lost $1.3 million this year. And by 2029, the balance of that $28 million will pretty much be completely eroded. So what happens is we either, as a city, we backstop it, or it does mean that folks that are benefiting from social housing or subsidies would essentially lose their subsidies.
Okay. On page 45, another housing question. It says there's an amount, page 48, Community Homeless Prevention Initiative. So we spend around $130 million a year, and this year we're growing it by 1.76 million. Can you just clarify what the, I guess what I'm trying to get is there any additional new capital, or these remain operational subsidy objectives?
So in regards to, so I think you are confusing the two, Madam Chair. I think you may be confusing the two line items. Under housing programs, we do have that 1.7 million increase. And as Janice previously mentioned, that's due to the indices for social housing, which she just explained. Under the Community Homelessness Prevention Initiative, you see a figure there for 2018 of $50 million. 37.6 million of that is from the province, and the city further subsidizes that envelope by $12.8 million.
And the 12.8 would be our additional cost to operate shelters in Ottawa, is that correct?
The Community Homelessness Prevention Initiative envelope funds a variety of housing and homelessness initiatives. So it is emergency shelter per diems. It's the per diems we pay to our residential services homes operators. It's other housing and homelessness programs in the city, and it's also the housing benefits that Ontario Works administers on our behalf. So it's a suite of services that are funded there.
Okay, do you have the proportion of that 12 million that is for shelter uses? That'd be per diem or any others?
Our emergency shelter spending, including both the community shelters and the family shelters, is about $24 million of that envelope.
Okay. Okay. Moving on to other ones in social services. What is the, so we've had a tough year in childcare and long-term care. We've certainly been discussing this for some time. What is the current waiting list for our long-term care access? So we often talk about the 10,000 for the Registry for Affordable Housing, but for long-term care in Ottawa, for the, I guess we have 4 or 5 centers?
So I'll ask Dean Lett, who is the administrator for, the director for long-term care. We do have 4 long-term care homes, and in terms of the wait list, he'll provide you with the numbers, but what's important is that there may be some duplication, as people may have interest in one or more homes. So there may be some duplication in the numbers that Dean Lett's going to provide.
To Councillor Fleury through Madam Chair. The wait list for the city long-term care homes currently, we have 2,318 individuals on the wait list. Individuals are eligible for up to 5 choices, and as Janice indicated, some of these people may be on more than one home's list, and currently the access to a home for the City of Ottawa is around 2 years to get into one of our homes.
Are we benchmarked at the province for that waiting list? Like, who manages that list?
Madam Chair, the wait list is actually managed by the LHIN. It used to be the CCAC, but the CCAC is now part of the LHIN.
Is there a provincial waiting list through the LHIN, or like how is it locally managed in some sense? Like, how would be the situation, let's say, per capita in a comparable city in Ontario?
At this time, Councillor, I don't have that information in terms of other regions within the province.
Okay. Sorry, I'm just wanting to make sure I cover. I guess my last one for this group would relate to childcare services. That's my last one for this group. There's an increase in almost $18 million in the budget for children's services. I guess my question is, I'm unclear because I read some numbers with the Auditor General. We've exchanged some emails. So today, how many people are on the wait list for subsidy? And then if this budget's approved under the current format, how would that impact the current waiting list for subsidies?
There are currently approximately 1,500 families waiting for a subsidy. With the expansion funding that we're receiving from the province, we hope to serve over 1,400. So we hope to get to the point where we have significantly reduced, if not eliminated, the wait list, especially for the children 0 to 6.
And would that apply right away in 2018?
it applies, we received some additional funding in 2017, so we've already started assessing the families, and we are getting the subsidies out the door as quickly as we can. So there was additional funding last year, additional funding for this year coming as well.
So could we get a report back to committee and protective services on the status of that waiting list following Q1 of 2018? That'd be a fair...
Absolutely, we certainly can do that.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Fleury, your time has expired, so if you'd like to come back, we can, but I want to go to first-time speakers. Councillor Eglai, you're next, and then Councillor Kakos.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. One of the things that we heard a number of delegations speak about is the $4 million in funding for housing that it was said was taken away. So this has come up before, so can you clarify, was it taken away, was it repurposed, what happened to that $4 million?
So in 2015, we had an approximately $11 million pressure in the housing services budget, which is about 10% of our budget. And this was primarily due to what Janice talked about earlier, is the provincial indices that we use to calculate what we pay to social housing providers. So at that point in time, we managed to mitigate about $7 million of that $11 million pressure. And we made the decision to transfer, to realign that $4 million from capital money into operating money.
So the overall housing budget didn't change, but how we used it, how we purposed it changed.
That is correct.
Okay. One of the delegations spoke about only 52 affordable units have been built in 2016. She didn't speak to 2017, so I'm wondering if you can tell us how many units we built in 2017 and how many we have in the pipe for the next, say, 3 years.
To date in 2017, we've completed 146 units. We currently have 255 units that are in various stages of development. We'll make an announcement earlier next week about another, let's say about another 130 units. And with funding that we have through our various federal, provincial funding streams and new funding that we attracted through the Home for Good program through an expression of interest, we'll be able to build somewhere in about up to 300 units to approve in 2018.
Okay, thank you very much. Appreciate that clarification. We also heard a lot about the Ottawa festivals and what they've done and the funding they have. And is a potential funding source for the Ottawa festivals ask the new hotel tax, and if so, like what role do we have to play in those discussions, if any?
So right now, the regulation that was just passed or released last week states that we have to ensure that Ottawa Tourism gets the same amount of funding from the hotel tax as they did in 2017. 2017 was a high watermark for hotel tax at the City of Ottawa, so we're not certain at this point in time actually how much we will raise. As you know, we don't even have the report passed. It will be discussed at Council next week. So at this point in time, I can't tell you if there's going to be extra monies raised that we don't have to pass to Ottawa Tourism, and what our role would be in it, I cannot tell you at this point in time, Councillor. That's still all to be determined.
Okay, no, fair enough. So what you're saying is there may be a surplus, but the baseline is the 2017 income or revenue?
Yes, it's what they raised in 2017 from the voluntary tax, that we will have to make certain that at least that amount goes to Ottawa Tourism. And I understand there was also a discussion about actually increasing the amount that they get to be able to deal with what we're referring to as the 2017 hangover. The fact that there's not all those events happening in 2018 that happened in 2017.
And do we have any say in how Ottawa Tourism spends the money that we give them? In other words, can we direct them that a portion of that needs to go to festivals, or have that discussion with them?
I don't think we do, but we do sit on the Ottawa Tourism Board. I do believe we have 2 members who sit on the board, so they come up with their plan as to how they are going to spend the money, and they have to report back to us, but I didn't see under the regulation that we had an ability to direct them to spend it one way or the other.
Okay, thank you for that. We also talked obviously a lot about ramp funding, and so my question, Ms. Burrell, if somehow this committee or council next week found a way to put more money on the table for ramp funding, how long would it then take your team to, in effect, administer and deploy those funds to applicants?
So we do have experience, obviously, with project funding, as we had been issuing it in the past. Claire Ferrer is the manager of partner and stakeholder initiatives, and she has a tremendous experience with the timing, the engagement that's required, and the rollout and the implementation, and ultimately the issuance. So I'll turn it over to Clara to provide you with a bit of detail in terms of past selection processes.
Madam Chair, what we would do first is look at what our process was in just before 2012 and establish a similar type of process. We would consult with the community of partners, who you heard from, some of whom you heard from today, and we would expect that if we were to use similar structures, we could have that funding out by the end of Q1.
Okay, so I'm assuming that would be, though, an interim step, because you're going to do a whole review next year that's going to look at ramp funding in a general sense and come back with recommendations about how that program should be run going forward, correct?
If, Madam Chair, if it's the will of council that we undertake that review in 2018, what we would do is likely approach this, depending on, of course, what council decides, approach this as a project funding situation, issuing one-time project funding for 2018 to organizations following, as I said, similar processes in terms of funding allocations that we've had in the past for project funding. That would give us 2018 to conduct a community funding framework review, and we would then bring, at the beginning of 2019, bring back revised community funding framework to council with recommendations for approval.
Okay, so you used the phrase, if it's the will of council, but way at the beginning of the meeting, which seems a long time ago now, Ms. Burrell, you said that we were doing a review in 2018, so do you still need us to give you some sort of approvals to have that done, or?
We are committed to doing that review. However, if a direction from council would work as well. And it would be, just back to your question about on-ramp, it wouldn't be a review of on-ramp, as there is none right now. That would be the project funding, but it would be the entire sustainability fund envelope of $23 million.
Okay, no, I appreciate that clarification. Finally, we had a very interesting proposal put in front of us this afternoon. It's not something you see every day when somebody walks into City Hall and says, we'd like to give you $100,000. So very intriguing and a potential solution to some of the discussions that we've been having all day. So I'm wondering if staff can be directed to provide a memo prior to council around the feasibility of accepting those funds from the Social Planning Council, and if it could set out what impediments there may be to accepting the funding, and assuming that there are none, procedurally how we should go forward in order to formalize that proposal into an actual agreement between the Social Planning Council and the city. Is that something that, I know it's a short timeline, but is that something that's doable?
Absolutely, it's doable. We can come back with some information in terms of, having worked with the various individuals involved, as well as with some recommendations.
Okay, appreciate that. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Councillor Egla. Councillor Kakish.
Thank you, Chair, and I want to start off with the three asks from Making Voice Count Group, and in terms of the first one where they asked for a cost of living adjustment, can staff speak to that in terms of the money that is reflected in this year's budget, what the cost of adjustment is for those groups? I assume something is accounted in terms of inflationary rate or increase for the different agencies.
So there's a 2% increase for housing and homelessness, plus an additional 1% for those groups, as well as for those receiving community funding. There was the base 2% inflationary increase, plus an additional 1% for both
so that's
those two
for the
groups.
93 or 94 groups that do get that funding?
That is correct.
Okay, so is there a reason that they're asking for it as their number one bullet if they're already getting it, or you're saying that they are getting that 2%?
Having read their document, I'd have to revisit it, but my understanding is that it was, they recognized the commitment from the city as a step forward, but there was some additional asks, I think, around increasing the sustainability fund and creating the project funding. But I could relook at that document.
Okay, but you're confident that the numbers that we're giving them now will reflect an increase of inflation or cost of living?
To 3%.
Okay.
Right.
With regards to the second point in your response to Councillor Eglai now, you're saying that we're reviewing it in 2018. Are we reviewing it because this came forward, or was it sounds like, so was this not on your working plan to be reviewed in 2018, or are we doing it reactively as a result of these groups coming forward now and suggesting this?
We had indeed discussed this last year in terms of going forward. We had identified $610,000 in additional funding during last year's budget, and at that point we had talked about then looking at 2018 as doing the full review of the community funding envelope.
Okay, so it's an official part or plan of your working plan, but at the same time, I guess council's not really allowed to dictate what the next council is going to do, so is that something that's going to be refreshed or worked on when the new council comes in next term?
So, Madam Chair, the intent is to do the review in 2018 and then come back with recommendations in 2019.
Okay. With regards to the 4 million, the last bullet in the Making Voices count, so can staff, Shelley, you spoke about that a bit, can you just clarify that point again and why there's an expectation from the members that we do this and why we're changing what we're doing with that 4 million?
So, Madam Chair, as I mentioned previously, the 4 million was realigned in 2015 to respond to an $11 million pressure we had within the social housing budget. So we managed to mitigate 7 million of that, still needed $4 million more. So without moving that money, we would have put approximately 500 households who were currently receiving a subsidy at risk of losing that subsidy and then at risk of housing instability and potentially homelessness.
Okay, so what is your plan to close that gap in the future, that $4 million that's being asked for, or how are we going to realign it in the future years to close the gap?
So I do want to reflect that, in terms of the city's operating commitment to housing here in the city, if we look at our overall budget, it's our percentage of the budget on the property tax base is $58 million. The province is 33%. We're 58%. And the federal government is about 9%. So from an operating perspective, we are contributing more money than any other level of government. From a capital perspective, we continue to contribute more money than any other level of government through things like collecting money from land sales, development charges, the housing reserve, from things like refinancing of mortgages with Ottawa Community Housing. So we are maintaining our capital contributions. We also look forward to recent announcements through the National Housing Strategy that will provide other opportunities for us to invest in new affordable housing development.
Okay, so you're saying the gap is really dependent on other levels of government at this point, and we're doing everything we can from the municipal tax portion.
Our commitment from the municipal tax base is certainly greater than the other levels of government on both the capital and the operating side.
Okay. I'll try to stay around these issues since I have you here now. With regards to the Syrian refugees and just refugee file in general, is that fairly steady now, and is it fair to say that the next step is the the challenges or the spike that we might see from the asylum seekers. I know the mayor's working group met last week. So can you speak a bit about that and how we're, the work that you're sort of doing or the measures that we are taking to deal with the potential spike in emergency shelters as a result of potential increases in asylum seekers as a result of foreign policy in the States in the coming year?
Madam Chair, so we started to see an increase in refugee claimants from the United States throughout the summer of last year. To date, we've seen 238 households that have sought emergency shelter within the city of Ottawa. Many of them are families, some are singles, a few are couples. So what we've done, we've been able to place probably only about 18 of those 238 families. We are practicing what we call active diversion. So we're encouraging people who are coming to the city to stay with family and friends. Some are making their own arrangements. Some are moving on to other communities. But we certainly, even before this influx of refugee claimants from the U.S., had started to see a significant and sustained increase in requests for family shelter placement that started in September of 2016. Normally through any given year, the numbers fluctuate month to month, but we haven't seen that reduction since about September of 2016. So over the summer, we did a couple of different things to try and create flow and movement within the family shelter system. We brought a report to council called the Local Priorities Report in September of this year, and now families who are experiencing homelessness in the city of Ottawa and are staying within one of our family shelters or our off-site services are automatically considered for all social housing options across the city of Ottawa that are suitable to their family size. Before, we would have families who would select 3 or 4 communities, and then their wait times would be much longer. We're also strictly enforcing the one offer policy. So when families receive an offer of social housing or a rent supplement and then their family shelter system, they're expected to accept that offer. Through these initiatives, we're trying to create flow and movement so we can be responsive to the increased demand we're seeing. We're also strongly promoting the use of housing allowances, which is a portable housing subsidy, to encourage families to move out into the private market. It promotes choice and helps with affordability from families. And we're strategically making investments so that we can continue to afford to offer those housing allowances.
Okay. And in terms of a lot of the groups that did a lot of the heavy lifting in the last year or so with the Syrian newcomers, perhaps Claire, to you, are we working closely with them? And we've heard from some of them today in terms of the pressures that they're facing and in terms of trying to maintain the services and resources. Do we work closely with them and ensure that we're giving them everything we can, whether it's NROC or the other agencies that have felt a lot of pressure in terms of the catchment areas where a lot of those newcomers are settling in?
Yes, Madam Chair, we continue to work very closely with community partners, settlement service providers, and others working specifically to respond to the needs of new arrivals and refugees, and we will continue to do that. We sit on Refugee 613, and through our community funding team, we are in constant contact with agencies that are feeling or experiencing pressures with regard to new arrivals. And or any other operational pressures that may have some kind of association with newcomers, and yeah, we will continue to do that.
And what are you aware of what the GARs are going to be like for the next year in terms of, is it going to be back to normal levels, or is it going to be, do we have any idea in terms of how the government-assisted refugees are going to be over the next year?
I don't have the government's declared 2018 immigrant landing levels with me, but I can certainly provide that information back to you.
We heard quite a bit, and this came up, as I mentioned earlier, at one of our budget meetings with Councillor Egla and Councillor Taylor in the West End about bed bugs, and we heard it from some of the delegations today. So. And it seems like everybody's pointing the finger to someone who's supposed to be helping with that. So what is the responsibility of us as a city to address that issue? And I know public health, some sort of awareness campaigns and public education campaigns, but what is the role of the municipality, or what can we do that we're not doing right now to help with bed bugs issues? No bed bugs experts?
I can certainly comment on some work that Housing Services is doing in collaboration with Ottawa Public Health. They've provided some funding to the Housing Services towards year end for the last 3 years. What we've done with that funding is we've reached out to one of our housing loss prevention agencies, Action Logement, who's then used that money to buy what we would call bed bug supplies, things like mattress covers and bed moats and Vaseline and garbage bags, and assembled them into kits. And then those kits are distributed to Housing First agencies, to community health and resource centers, to rooming houses, to supportive and affordable housing providers. So that's what we're doing at Housing Services. I can also provide a little bit of context around for Ontario Work, so the Employment and Social Services. They also provide some supports with funding for those same set of supplies. They'll also provide funding if somebody is unable to prep their unit for a bed bug treatment. They'll also provide some funding through housing benefits to assist that individual with that particular activity so that their unit is ready to spray.
Okay, so the kits you said come from your budget, the kits that we can give out to people in housing come from your shop, or do they come from a different source?
They come from Ottawa Public Health, who is providing money to Housing Services, which we then flow to a community agency who does all the ordering on our behalf and acts as that central agent to then get the kits out into the community.
Okay, but why does it seem that from the delegations who spoke today that there's an issue of this doesn't resolve it, or there's a bigger issue than that, even if they have the kits, are not eradicating the problem?
This is an enormous issue in our community. It's an enormous issue in communities worldwide, and it's not the responsibility of any, to the best of my knowledge, it's not the responsibility of any one service area within the city at this point in time.
Okay. Chair, do you want me to go back up the list, or do you?
Yes, please, your time's up. Thank you. Councillor DeRose.
Thank you, Madam Chair. That was a very good presentation, and I just really, I know people think it's a long day, but it's very important for us to listen to the needs of our community citywide, and it was really an eye-opener to see and hear from most of those agencies. Before I start my question, I want to thank all the delegation today that they came up and spoke about their issues and the challenges they have day after day serving our residents in the city of Ottawa. I want to gear my question, and I know I'm going to go back and circle to one issue that really close to my heart and to my community, and I'm going to talk a little bit about paramedics, and I want to ask, through you, Madam Chair, ask Chief Damonte and probably Chief Cassidy about a few questions. Throughout the process, I know we've been working in the last few years to bring back the number and the response time that we deserve in the city of Ottawa. I just want to see that with the new investment that we're making with the 14, and I know in the last few years we had 24 and 12. I know, and congratulations, now you are catching up actually and hitting your 75% at an 8-minute percentile. But what this is going to really do to the rural resident and what we could expect to see in the next year. I know that the process is long, and I know that when we hire 12 paramedics, it's not we can hire them today and then they'll be starting tomorrow. There is a training involved, and I understand the 6 months overlap. Could you just give me what our resident will expect in 2018 for response time?
So, Chair, on the more operational side, I'll turn it over to Chief Cassidy. But in essence, and I think you had mentioned this term, we're getting back on track. So we have gotten back on track with the investment that Council and this committee has done. We are now meeting our targets. The analysis now that's been done is we continue to project. We look at historic growth. We've continued to project that. And the additional 14, we're quite confident will maintain that response time target with the additional 14. So certainly that's what you'll see if the additional 14 are hired. You're correct, and I mentioned it earlier. I think it was in a response to one of your colleagues in French, however. So We wait for the graduation of the colleges because they come through their 3-year program as graduate paramedics. We'll hire them in June, and then they'll go through what's called our intake process, our preceptor process, where they'll be integrated into the city, its policies, its procedures, our operating, our functioning, and then they'll be released into the community to serve the community as of July. Operationally, I'm going to turn it over to Chief Cassidy to tell you how, and we've had these discussions about the urban core, and now as we're covering that, certainly and I know it's near and dear to your heart, Councillor, and the rural councillors, how it's going to impact positively the results in the rural communities.
Thank you. Through you, Madam Chair. And thank you for the question. It is a balancing assessment that it gets done to assign and deploy the resources that are available at any given time. And any addition to those resources, given a stable call volume at any given point, is going to increase our coverage capabilities. So while we maintain our priority post listing and we fill that priority post listing, the more resources that are available at any given time can fill up that priority post list higher. There are other aspects that we're continuing to look at and that we've looked at over the last couple of months regarding the ratio of transport vehicles and PRUs, the single paramedic units. And we're undertaking there's a couple of things that need to happen to get this process underway. One is a change in provincial policy to allow PRUs to attend calls as single units. Right now we send, if we send a PRU, we also send a transport vehicle at the same time. That can utilize 2 resources when one would do. So we're chasing that policy change with the ministry. Regardless of that, the ratio of our transport to PRUs is under review right now, and so within the current and the 2018 funding envelope, we'll be looking at maximizing those resources through that ratio change. So to circle back to your question, Councillor, I'd like to just say that the investment in paramedics and in the resources can only benefit the performance of the system.
Thank you, Chief. I'm really happy to hear this positive news because, you know, Madam Chair, under your leadership in this term, and I want to also thank Mr. Damonte for yourself, Councillor Shantiri, and the Mayor's office for working with us. I know you recall the issue that we started having in 2015, and you listened to our resident in the city, and you worked very hard with our general manager, and you work also with the chief at that time, and you work with the councillor that's been impacted, and the response time in the city should be really reflecting on the people's life in the city of Ottawa. I can't believe an investment, 50% from the city and 50% from the province, and we have a lacking of hiring, and we decided that we need to freeze back in the years. I will never, making sure in every budget, as long as I'm a councillor, that will never accept a year that we will not look at the growth at the city and hiring paramedic to making sure to achieve our number. Like, if you look at the fire and paramedic, we invest 100% on both services, which is core service and paramedic, that we receive 50%, we lack, and we put our life of our resident in jeopardy and dangerous, because it's very important transporting that patient from point A to point B to the hospital. The first 10-15 minutes are critical in any incident, heart attack or stroke. So I'm very happy to see the investment, and I want to thank the chair and all of you for working with us to making sure this will never happen again. And I don't see any time that the city of Ottawa will play catch up in any services, specifically in core services. So thank you for that. My second question will probably, thank you, Chief. My second question, Madam Chair, will probably direct it to our Parks and Recs General Manager, Mr. Chenier. I know you've been actively working hard, weather challenging, and I know you have lots of park in the city of Ottawa need to be rebuilt and constructed. And how do you see, I look at the budget line and all the projects that you are trying to get for next year. Are you confident that you're going to be able, I know there is some project that's been a little bit back behind. How are you going to be able to achieve these projects in the next year with the challenge that whether we have and staff and behind schedule on building parks?
Thank you for the question, Chair. We've made sure over the last year we have been actively recruiting and finally have a fairly full complement of park planners working within our department, which is the first time in a long time. So we understand that coming through the reorganization and the reestablishment of a full planning unit within our department, there has been a bit of rough patch where work assignments were a little bit scattered, but we have a good system in place now. Just about every one of our positions has been filled, and by 2018 they will be. And we're confident going in. We've started doing the work allocation, and you've probably talked to Kevin about this already. And we've looked at all of the critical projects in your ward. We know looking at an arena revitalization is important. We know the Greeley Playground is important. There are a couple of key projects in there. I can assure you they've all been assigned. We have some good staff lined up for those, and I think we'll be able to deliver fully in 2018.
Thank you, Dan. One more question, and probably most of my colleague touched on it. Councillor Kakesh and Councillor
Councillor,
Brock.
you're out of time. You'll have. I'm sorry, but you'll have to
That's
go
fine.
back on the
I'll
list. Okay, Councillor Nussbaum.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm just flipping my pages. I have a few questions first on social services, and I'm just looking at page 87 of the budget documents and just trying to make sure that I understand the implications of some of these numbers. So my first question is just looking at the municipal portion of the spending on social services. Is it correct to characterize the municipal portion as meaning that the draft budget proposes that we would spend $4.7 million less on social services in 2018 than we did in 2017?
Yes, Madam Chair, that is correct because of the upload, the balance of the benefits to social assistance. This is the last year. It began in 2008. We were at 97%. Going into 2018, it will be 100%. So that is a reduction that the city has to pay towards benefits for social assistance.
Right, yeah, and I see that number on page 88, the 5.2 million, which is a result of the remainder of the provincial upload. Is it, well, I guess my question is, if that money hasn't gone to social services, which it clearly hasn't, because the proposal is to spend $4.7 million less, can we track where that $5.2 million has gone?
So the upload money goes towards council's strategic initiatives, and it's not spending less in the social assistance budget. It's being replaced by provincial dollars, and therefore the city doesn't have to make its contribution.
Right, but what you're saying is, so the provincial upload, the $5.2 million, goes into general revenue for use for strategic initiatives.
Madam Chair, that's correct.
And so, because I don't have that number in front of me, and I don't know if the treasurer or the deputy treasurer does, is it possible to identify which strategic initiative is the beneficiary of the $5.2 million that resulted from the provincial upload?
Off the top of my head, no, but you approved term of council priorities, and that would have included the $5.2 million in 2018, and it would have been allocated to a number of projects across the entire city. So I will If you want, Councillor, I can dig up your term of council priorities in the spreadsheet that was included with it, which shows where the allocation is in each of the years.
That would be helpful, thank you. Turning to recreational and cultural and facilities, so I'm on page 100 now of the budget documents. Just looking at the revenues that we received in 2017 in fees and services, it looks like we almost doubled the amount of money that came in, so 1.3 million instead of the expected 758,000, which is not necessarily a bad thing at all, but I'm just curious. I wasn't able to find an explanation for why it was that we almost doubled our revenues from what we expected to get in this area over the course of the year. I can point you to the right line if you can't
Yeah,
find it.
I think I have it, Councillor. So what you're seeing there, I believe, is that, and this is in the GM section of the budget, which is generally the collect-all for all the grants, external grants that we get, provincial, federal, whatever they might be. And of course, those are always at the beginning of the year based on what we got the year before. By and large, they are an in and out type of transaction because for the most part, for every dollar we get, we have to spend on a very specific project. Some of them are, for example, provincial programs for special needs to integrate children into programming, those kinds of, there is a large Healthy Kids grant that comes in as part of that wasn't anticipated. So by and large, those are a best guess from year to year in terms of how much in terms of grants will come in.
Okay, I see the additional money that we got from the province and the feds on page 103 for community recreation and cultural programs, but if the 1.3 million that I'm speaking of on page 100, it was flow-through money from the province or the feds, why wouldn't it be listed under revenue by the federal or provincial government in the lines above fees and services?
Yeah, I'm being told it's HST. Yeah, that's the other thing that collects in the GM budget is the HST money.
So
on page 101,
why did we almost double the amount of
HST
HST revenue that we expected to get?
We make applications all the time for the HST rebate, and depending on the spending in the previous year will determine how much you're going to get back. So it varies from year to year. We have a sort of a base budget for it, but it really depends on the spending.
Okay. Then turning to page 103, and I don't know if this, Mr. Chenier, is what you intended to speak of, but we were also the beneficiaries in 2017 of additional monies from the province and the federal government for community recreation and cultural programs. And I just wasn't sure, was that additional 2017 money that we got from the province and the feds this year? Or I'm just curious if you know what accounts for almost doubling of the provincial money and doubling of the federal money.
Again, what we budget for that is the best guess, and we apply every year. Some of these are employment programs, some of these are special project programs, and the net result is really a best guess at the beginning of the year and then an accurate reporting at the end.
Okay. I don't know whose question this is, but when I was looking at the Capital Works budget on page 187, I saw reference, I think it's a social service item, renewal of city assets, and again, I'm on page 187 towards the bottom of the page, and it's not a lot of money, but we have something called the CSSD Client and Community Hub Design and Build Fund, and I just was curious what that fund was for. I'm particularly interested in community hubs these days, and so was just curious if that's money that is available for spending on that item.
So, Madam Chair, we do have space in our social service centers where we provide employment services, and we do invite agencies to come in and provide services to our clients and also to bring their clients in. We are in the process of reviewing that at this point, and I would want to check back with the Director of Community and Social Services to see if there's anything that's been planned around community hubs, and it is an interest of ours as well.
Great. Thank you. I just want to finish with two items. The first is the issue of the hotel tax, which came up. I think Councillor Eglai had some questions about it. I think the Treasurer remarked that in the draft recommendation that's before Council next week, the advice from staff is that we set the revenues that we give to Ottawa Tourism at the level that they received through a 3% levy in 2017. And it just strikes me as a little bit odd to do it that way. Let's assume, and hopefully this won't happen, but if there were ever a situation, if we set that as the benchmark, and in a future year at 4% we don't achieve the amount that we achieved at 3% in 2017, aren't we setting ourselves up for a potential deficit? And if that's the contractual agreement, where would that delta come from?
So first of all, it's not staff's recommendation, it's in the regulation that the province passed last week, which says you have to, if you have a voluntary hotel tax now, once there is a mandatory hotel tax, you have to ensure that the tourism entity that was receiving those funds, which in this case is Ottawa Tourism, receive the equivalent of what they received in 2017. So the first thing you have to do is make them whole. But there is no obligation if the funds actually, because 2017 was our high water mark, if we do not generate that in 2018 with a 4% and everybody participating, if we don't generate it, there's no obligation on the city to make them whole.
And does the regulation also allow municipalities to determine, for instance, if, and I think you answered this question, but I just want to be certain. So if we set the tax at 4%, do we have the discretion to say, we're going to give Ottawa Tourism 3%, let's assume that we match, or let's assume either that the 3% meets that target, or we defer it to 2019 so that we have a lower benchmark, so the expectation of increased revenues is less. But do we have the discretion to not give 100% of the hotel tax revenue to Ottawa Tourism?
So your first obligation is to keep them whole on a dollar amount. So if we raise 10 million, they received 10 million from that in 2017, that's what they have to receive in 2018. We don't know what this will generate. So once you get past keeping them whole, then the discussion becomes what happens with the residual. We would be coming back to council to discuss the allocation of any residual in the future. But at this point in time, I can't even tell you what that potentially could be. We do sit, right now the Mayor and the Director of Economic Development sit on the board of Ottawa Tourism, so they do have an ability to influence what Ottawa Tourism spends the money on, but ultimately City Council, other than once you get past the 100% of what they received in 2017, doesn't have an ability to influence what they spend that money on.
Councillor, your time's up. Sorry, I'm going to have to put you back on the list if you want to continue. We'll move then to Councillor Kadri.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair, and I too want to start off by thanking all the delegations that came today to present to us some very valid points and some good discussion points in terms of where they feel that some of the funding may be lagging or may need improvements. I have a couple of questions. First, starting with the social housing and stuff, to Ms. Burrell. Ms. Burrell, in terms of the money that we're obligated to fund as a municipality for social programming, you mentioned, or I think one of your representatives mentioned, that 58% is municipal funding that we're spending, 33% is provincial, and the rest is federal. How much of that are we obligated to spend?
For social housing?
Yes.
All of it.
No, no, I understand that, but I'm just saying, isn't there a formula handed down by the province to say that you must spend this much on social housing or in affordable housing?
Right. So it's not a specific, Madam Chair, it's not a specific amount. Every year, they do a review of a series of indices based on what's happened the previous year around changes around insurance, utility, water costs, all of those things. And based on that, they come up with a percentage of increase. So it's not a flat 2% or anything like that. And those indices are passed down by the provincial government to the City of Ottawa, and they say, thou shalt pay social housing providers this number of funding related to those 5 or 6 indices. So in this case, there is a requirement for the city to add $1.7 million for social housing providers. And as Shelley pointed out earlier, a number of years ago, it was up to $12 million. So from one year to the next, it's difficult to know what those indices are going to be. And it is legislated under the Housing Services Act.
So how do you budget for that on an ongoing basis, yearly basis? I mean, are you picking numbers out of, out of a hat, or do you have an idea where the province may be headed?
We look at the trends over the past several years, but as we've just pointed out, there are some blips from one year to the next. We do receive the information typically in June or July, so it is a little bit of a race to get it into the budget. So it is a little bit of guesswork. The best that we can do based on previous years, and some understanding of where utilities fees are utility rates and those things are going. But it is difficult to prepare a budget before having those indices provided by the province, for sure.
Thank you. And I've got a question for Shelley. In terms of you mentioned, and I think some of my colleagues have already questioned you on the $4 million that you transferred from capital to operating. Two questions on that. First of all, are you or is the department allowed to transfer money between operating and capital? Because usually in accounting processes, both accounts should be somewhat separate.
So the $4 million came out of the city 100% Housing and Homelessness Initiative. So that was the $14 million that was approved back in 2012, and the decision was made at committee to move the $4 million from capital over to operating to offset that pressure. Madam Chair, I would just also like to add to what Shelley mentioned earlier, that since that time, there was an additional $2 million brought in 2015 that was added to the Housing and Homelessness Initiative, and that funding is going towards operating dollars to make sure that those investments and those builds, for example, supportive housing, so we would get the provincial, provincial and federal capital dollars to build it, but no operating dollars. So that $2 million that we received in 2015 essentially made sure that we could be successful with those projects, and those were very important to the Housing First initiative to ensure that we can move long-stay clients out of shelters, as these people will not likely be able to live independently. They need supportive housing, so we need to build it because it doesn't exist, and we need operating dollars for 24/7 support.
Okay, thank you for that. In terms of coming to a question of Mr. Chenier, Mr. Chenier, earlier today you mentioned in rehabilitation costs for some city facilities or park facilities of $23.64 million. How do you distinguish, or how do you allocate that funds in terms of buildings that may need it or may not need it, or could be waited a year or two? How do you decide on those?
Chair, the fund we're talking about is roughly $15 million for buildings and another $5 million for parks. All of the city assets are part of our comprehensive asset management system that is run by Mr. Gontier, by the infrastructure department. We work with them, and they rate and evaluate every asset on an ongoing basis. And generally, based on the evaluation system that they have, they recommend, and what you see in this book is essentially the highest need items in each of the categories that they are recommending be addressed this year.
And through that review and through that funding, are there centers or facilities and parks that you think need to be removed from that inventory or closed because of their years of service or because the investment would be greater than what the building is actually worth?
Chair, there are assets that are being reviewed for decommissioning or to look at either disposing of. We are, as we've advised council, looking at a plan to look at all of our arenas, for example, and rationalize them and look at some of the aging inventory to see if they can either be repurposed or replaced. And so yes, there are buildings that are approaching end of life on the list and have been identified as such with, you know, a high needs and a need for a future plan.
In terms of the replacing those buildings going forward, once you decide that they have to be decommissioned or not renewed in terms of going forward, do you have a replacement cost for them, or is it just because of new buildings maybe coming online?
Chair, generally that would be up to the programming department to identify what we would replace it with. The asset management program essentially identifies components of the building, roof, foundations, electrical, ventilation, those kinds of things, and the cost of keeping what's there alive. The replacement rationale is something that the department would come forward to council and say, this building is at end of life. Often part of the business case for doing that is avoiding future or impending life cycle costs, which may even contribute in some cases into that project.
Thank you for that, Mr. Chenier. And my final question is back to General Manager Mr. Demonte. Mr. Demonte, in terms of the presentation that Mr. Roger made about the need for bylaw officers going forward or services that they would be providing next year, especially with the introduction of legalized marijuana. In terms of the smoking part of it, if it's a medicinal use of a marijuana item, how are we going to enforce that in terms of within our smoking bylaw?
Chair, that is still up for debate. The Government of Ontario, as they're reviewing multiple legislations as it impacts the intake of marijuana now as a product that will be legally available in Ontario, that also is a question that's being asked. And we met with representatives of 3 ministries, and they kind of gave us an overview of what they're starting to look at. And the Smoke Free Ontario Act may see some modifications, but I'll let Director Chapman talk to you a little bit more about what they kind of hinted towards, you know, that they may be giving us different authorities. But again, as I indicated initially, it is a bit of a moving target, and they haven't locked things down, so we don't know exactly the answer to that question. But
thank you. Through Madam Chair, that's exactly it. I mean, it's a moving target. We're not sure what's going to happen come the new year. What I can tell you is that we are working with the province and ongoing communication, and there is some discussion with mostly with the health units, but in our case where we do the enforcement of Smoke Free Ontario, we've been included in those discussions, and it's about how we're going to regulate. So my understanding is that some amendments will be done to Smoke Free Ontario to include marijuana.
Thank you for that, Mr. Chapman. And just the final question on that, in terms of labor resources for next year, I mean, obviously legalizing marijuana is going to put extra pressure on bylaw going forward, at least that's the assumption. Have you built any of that money into this budget at all, or is that going to be a separate ask?
Yeah, so through you, Madam Chair, we are, as you know, we underwent a service review through a consultant, KPMG, this past summer, and we continue to analyze the report that's been provided to us by our consultant. We are coming with a staff report on our service review in Q1 next year. So we're not sure yet where that'll land. We're just still in the review stage.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Kadri. Councillor Fleury.
Merci, Madame la Présidente. Avant d'aller en parc et loisirs, juste revenir sur mes questions au niveau du logement, Janice. Il y a eu 3 éléments que je trouvais qui étaient peut-être pas clairs. C'est que la ville comme telle, nous,
There were 3 elements I thought were not quite clear. When we don't have any new projects now. The money we get from the province and the federal allowed us to unblock new units. Is that true? Yes, that's true. But we're giving money to waive the fees. And for waiving the fees and contingencies. Shelley gave a list earlier of all the capital projects we had in 2017 and the ones that are planned in 2018. If it's only a certain amount of money or the number of units, it should be enough to be clear, you know, because my colleague Michael earlier said, well, OCH through renewed mortgages, everything we can do with this is reinvest in our property. We're not reinvesting, so this does not create any new units. It just allows us to maintain our current stock. I just wanted this to be clear for everybody. Could you give the committee the list of what was done in 2017 and what we planned for 2018? Absolutely. Last thing regarding housing. On page 170, we have investments that are required for shelters in the city. I heard that these shelters were almost at their end of life. Do we have an audit plan? And if so, can it be shared with us? Well, I should ask Plight for information on that, because you're right. We have 2 shelters where there are problems, quite right. And Carling, too. I think is it in good state. And the third one is O'Connor, a women's shelter. It needs a lot of work. But as for the investments, I don't have the details on what is required. If it's the roof, the windows, I don't have any information. But we have an audit plan, asset management plan for this. Could you share that with the committee? Yes.
Dan, sur la page 101, il y a...
Page 101, Public Art Policy Renewal. I think it's important to have it. That's right. But where will the funds come back? $250,000. It says that it will come from new developments, but I don't understand. It seems strange. Unless I'm mistaken, it should come from operations, because the funds are coming from development. It's the 1% of development. I don't think we should use this 1% to develop our plan. It's kind of stealing from our art sector. Well, Madam Chair, it's nothing news. It's the extension of a practice that existed before. Essentially, it's a staff working on capital projects for public arts. The compensation for that staff is covered through the project funds, so through the 1%. And what's new is that with the new arts policy that was adopted in 2016, I believe, there was an expansion and more flexibility granted for eligible projects, or at least we specified there were more eligible projects for the 1%. And that created an increase in the number of projects, and that will also require more work to be done and more compensation. So with the net zero sum, that shows that there is more activities in the arts program, just like it was for projects before. Page 121, there's various improvements, parks improvements. One is parking lot asphalt. I don't understand. $145,000. Why would Park and Recreation pay for parking lots? I think it should be the Parking Reserve Fund and not Parks and Recreations. Could you clarify? Well, Madam Chair, it's the explanation. I talked to Councillor Cardry about this. It's part of the comprehensive asset management. The parking lots around our facilities are included in this project. From what I know, I'm not an expert, the parking area in parks and recreation facilities are not covered by the Parking Reserve Fund. I'm not an expert, but usually the repairs or replacement are funded through the Comprehensive Asset Management Plan.
We have a huge parking reserve fund, and there's an opportunity for us to redo our parking lots in parks. We shouldn't undercut those efforts. We should focus on the asset management plan we could do for our parks building and others, which already have a backlog, and actually fund the parking lots with the parking lot dollars. So maybe, Marianne, you can clarify why we're not using those funds.
I harken back to the time I tried to use the parking reserve to pay for the parking lot at Lansdowne and was told, no, you're not able to use the parking reserve for anything other than on-street and off-street parking that contributes in the areas where the BIAs, where most of this revenue is generated from. So this is a part of the parking management strategy that was adopted back in 2008. I think yesterday Kevin indicated that there's a review going to be undertaken of the whole parking management strategy, and perhaps that's something that could be included in it.
Yeah, so what's the date for that review?
Chair will be doing that next term of council, probably 2019.
Okay, back to Parks and Rec. I have two more questions, Madam Chair, and then I'll be done. Dan, you and I were talking offline about some of the fees for arena, public skating, and public swims. I've highlighted that in my first term in 2010, I thought it was great that we froze the fees, but after further thinking, I thought it was probably a bad idea because within the brackets, there was some of the individuals that could pay more. Adult hockey leagues, for example, while our Learn To programs were suffering, and now we're catching up. And I'd like maybe for you, for public record, to explain why those percentages are that high. I understand that it relates to staff salaries or...
Chair, there are a couple of instances here to explain. Most of our fee schedule is at 2%, and that is as per the council directive. There are two or three notable examples. One of them is arena ice rentals that are at 5.6%. That higher amount is the third year of a 3-year plan that council approved 3 years ago. To bring arena ice rental rates back to the level of subsidy, both for minors and adults, that they were prior to the 4-year freeze on fees. Because, of course, that 4-year freeze on fees degraded the level of subsidy that council had approved when they first approved this model at amalgamation, which essentially was set based on looking at what all former municipalities were charging for ice time and coming up with a median number. And the result of that was that children's ice rental fees were, the subsidy was set at 50%, and the adult was set at 16%, and that was a negotiated compromise back then. The 4-year freeze changed that to the point where we were then providing a higher subsidy for both adults and for children. The 3-year 5.6% increase will this year bring it back to where it would have been had we just put inflation on those fees in every year since they were frozen. So that's the explanation for the 5.6. It's the last year. Next year, you would see arena fees increase to a similar level to all of our other fees. The other example in there that is beyond the 2% is the public swimming and public skating fees, and it shows a 0 to 9% increase, and that is largely a function of the fees are so small that when you apply a 2% increase to it, it results in a couple of cents of increase. And generally what we do with public swimming and public skating is that we don't increase it every year, but when we do, we round it out to the next 25 cents. And that's mostly from a cash handling, petty cash management perspective that we like to keep things in increments of 25. So this is one of those years where we're increasing it. It looks like a lot, but generally it's a quarter that we're talking about.
And I can respect that. I guess my point is that the blanket freeze was a good theory. Now, the blanket unfreeze, in my mind, creates other sets of challenges. So I think the summer camps, the public swims, the public skates, and some of our Learn To program should flatten out as soon as we can. My last question is in relations to part of your portfolio is also the building management. I think the program is the BEAM group. We've had a successful program in Kevin's group about the street lighting, and Phil Landry, I guess, in street lighting and the LED conversions. I'd love to hear from you on what do we plan to do in our facilities to get those LED paybacks, which have proven to be more effective than initially thought.
Chair, yes, the BEAM group has been fortunate to benefit from $1 million a year in funding for energy retrofits. And that has been over the last 3 years. We have committed all but to, I believe it's somewhere in the area of $200,000 to date of the money allocated to that. And it has been things like LED conversion, switch to high efficiency boilers, HVAC upgrades to more efficient models. This year there is another $1 million available, and there is also money in the Energy Evolution program, which is a separate fund of which I believe some of the funds from that may well benefit into the BEAM work of retrofitting even more city facilities with, amongst others, LEDs and a lot of other components that make the buildings more efficient.
So you are thinking of following a similar model as the other group to match those financial gains?
Yes, that's absolutely the model that's being followed.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Fleury. Councillor Dewars.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just have one question. I heard from Councillor Kakish and Councillor Brockington talking about the refugee and the impact that they are making in our community. And I think we talked about that last year when we were talking about the 1 year mark. My question is to staff, are we looking, when we are reviewing the process and talking to these agencies, so can we know that how many agencies are impacted by the refugee demand that we have in our community? Like, are we keeping track with those numbers to be able, when we sit with our counterpart or the federal government, to talk about the cost and the prices that we are paying for some other agency that really taken from other agency? Like, we're putting a pressure basically on our agency that we already serving our community, and now we have extra pressure, and the first door it's the municipality and us. So I just need to know, like, are we proactively asking and talking to this agency to find out the pressure and how much is in dollar sign this is translating to the community?
So, Madam Chair, first of all, in terms of social assistance, we know that approximately 70% of the families did apply for social assistance after the first year. all social assistance benefits are provided by the provincial government, and part of those services include employment services and some discretionary benefits. So that's from the perspective of the services that the City of Ottawa provides. In terms of the other agencies, I'll turn it over to Clara in terms of knowing whether or not we have a sense of the capacity and the pressure.
Thank you.
Madam Chair, to our knowledge, there has not been a financial accounting of impact. What we have heard around the Refugee 613 table is how agencies have come together. They've leveraged each other's resources, they've leveraged community resources, they've leveraged funding from other levels of government to adequately respond to the needs of refugees. Of course, there are pressures that they continue to face, and we hear about them, we talk with them as part of a collection of partners that are looking at what are the systemic issues that are being faced by newcomers and refugees. And we are at those tables and are proactive in the planning together with the community partners.
Thank you, but I still think we need to proactively find the financial pressure of the dollar, so we'll be able, when we talk to our federal partner or some other level of government, to be able to get help, because basically the community and the agency that you and I were talking about, they are paying the price and the pressure from other communities. So they're taking, basically they're serving the refugees. I'm also serving some other resident in the community, and we're putting pressure on both of them. I think through the process, maybe we should ask and look at their financial and finding out in City Hall how much in dollar sign and financially for the years to come, so we know what we're looking at.
We could bring, Madam Chair, we can certainly bring that question back to the Refugee 613 table and community partners that we work with.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Drews. Councillor Kakish.
Thank you, Chair. To Mr. Chenier, for the rec complex in Riverside South, there's $4.5 million there, and the 2.9 for the detailed design. So I just want to confirm that that's the money is for the land transaction, and then the money that's going to come back from the local developer there to help with the detailed design. Is that correct?
That's right. One is for the district park money, and the other is for the complex.
So when is that transaction going to happen?
Councillor, I'll try to get an update. I don't have, I haven't heard a recent update on that, but I can get back to your office on that.
Okay, but we're going to proceed with the detailed design or some. I know we had the preliminary open house, but to proceed with the detailed
Yes, of course, that is, as we've been discussing, that we move to a detailed design.
Okay. For the, I know somebody had mentioned earlier about some of the delays sometimes in terms of new parks or CILP projects, and you said we're at capacity, but I heard recently too that there was some delays on some of the projects, like the Finley Creek one for Diamond Jubilee. But so can you just confirm that everything's up to where you need it to be in terms of staffing, and you have the park planners that you need to do everything on time, and we're not waiting 6 months to get a bench or a picnic table in a park?
Chair, yes, we've in the latter part of this year, we've been successful with hiring. We have, I think, one left to go, but we're in good shape to start in 2018.
Okay. One of the things that I've talked to you about was I know you've been working on this, or planning to work on this in terms of the next little while, the facilities that we have that are being eaten up by storage space. So things like spaces like the Gloucester's Community Center and others. So where are you in that in terms of your planning and workload? Do you have resources to start that process in the coming year?
Chair, the councillor is talking about the museum deaccessioning policy that we are working on and the process. I just a week ago was presented with the final, what looks like is going to be the final draft of this policy. We will be moving to public consultation in the new year, and so yes, we're very close, and we will have a report before council in the first half of next year.
Okay, and with regards to it, you had mentioned as well earlier, looking at the existing facilities that we have across the city and what is being used and what isn't being used and what we need and what we don't need. What are the timelines on that and a report coming forward with that?
The first roster of work on that, it relates to standalone arenas, and the timeline for the work is to do most of the work in 2018 and to report in the new term of council.
With regards to one of the delegations, Ottawa Festivals, we've heard about the 2017 hangover effect, and Carolyn, I think when she was here, mentioned that she's working closely with you and Parks and Rec. So how are you contributing or assisting those organizations to ensure a smooth succession for them in 2018 with some of their events and the success of those events and attracting the numbers that they'd like to see for their festivals?
Chair, most of the festivals well, certainly a good number of the festivals that Caroline represents do receive funding through our cultural funding program. Festival funding is about $1.6 million a year. It's in this budget, as well as the 3% increase to that base, including the provision for minimum wage, which we believe will impact festivals because they, of course, have a lot of workers that are in that category. So we will be working with them in terms of the plans they have for this year. Of course, they did benefit from the additional influx of funding last year from the 2017 office that won't be available this year. And so we will do what we can within the existing resources to support it and to make sure that the funds that are available go to the events that are going to give the best results. That's done through the arm's length jury process, but we are very aware that this is the year after, and that we need to give some focus to keeping things going and finding events to take up where 2017 leaves off.
Okay. Thank you. Recently, the province announced more funding for the child care subsidies, and
Councillor, we were hoping to hold the child care questions until we go through it, because I have to remove myself from the chair, if you don't mind. Otherwise, we'll just play some musical chairs here. Is that okay?
Yeah, no, that's fine.
Okay, great. Anything else?
No, that's all, thanks.
Okay. Councillor Shirelli.
Okay, thank you, Madam Chair. Question for Mr. Chenier. Under Recreation Cultural Facility Services, Operating Resource Requirement Analysis, so under the revenue, I see that last year we had a deficit of, well, we brought in $4.5 million less than we budgeted for. And this year it looks like we're budgeting for the same amount that we budgeted for last year. So I'm just wondering what ideas you have to try to make up that difference this year.
Could you point me to a page, Councillor?
Page, that's a good question, 103, I believe. I think this is arenas and other facilities, revenue from them.
So, yes, Councillor, we're offsetting our revenue shortfalls, and there are several categories of revenue business lines that are not achieving their revenues, amongst others arenas and memberships.
So I'm just asking what ideas.
So we're offsetting it by reducing the expenditure side, so that at year end, like last year, we had, I believe, a small surplus last year, and I think we're looking at a break even for this year overall as a department. So we're absorbing it within the department through control of expenditures. Some of the revenue expectations are tied, do have, if you don't achieve the revenue, you don't spend the money to offer the program, so it's not always a net complete loss. But there are several areas of the budget still that are revenue deficient.
Okay, but last year we didn't achieve the revenue and we did spend the money. And this year we're budgeting for the same amount of revenue that we budgeted for before.
Yeah, overall as a department, and
okay,
we do
maybe
need...
offline, if you could just show me some of those ideas.
Yes, okay. Absolutely.
Okay.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Shirelli. There's no other people on the questioning list. I just have one follow-up question for you, Mr. DeMonte. And with regards to a question that was asked about the 14 paramedics in 2018, and I thought I heard you say that we would pay 100% of the cost because we were out of sync with the provincial funding stream. So I guess just a couple questions about that. One is, can we get in sync with the provincial funding stream if we were to move that date in some direction? Or if we can't, can we recoup that money in 2019?
Chair, the province has been using this model for some time now, and I don't remember exactly when it started. That is the model. The municipality makes its investment, then we provide the actuals to the province, and then in our next year funding, they adjust their funding to the municipality. So not that I'm aware of there's any way to recoup it. That's the model that's used across the province.
So it's not funded retroactively from the date we brought them on?
No, it is not.
Okay, thank you. So moving on to the next segment then, are there any motions or directions to staff? Councillor Nussbaum.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just returning to this question of the on-ramp funding, and just so that there's greater precision on what Councillor Eglai had requested of staff, I just want to read out a direction to staff, which I've checked with Councillor Eglai, and he agrees is in the spirit of what he was intending with his direction. So I'll just read it out and pass it to staff in writing. So that staff be directed to identify potential sources of funding from within the Community and Protective Services Committee budget that could be reallocated to allow the city to take advantage of the Social Planning Council's offer of matching funding, and that options be provided to Council prior to its consideration of the 2018 draft budget. So there the idea is building on Councillor Eglai's direction. If indeed there is a mechanism by which we can take advantage of the Social Planning Council's generous offer, I think it would be important to understand where that money could conceivably come from. We'll ask the CPS portfolio to identify $100,000 as a minimum, which, by the way, I calculated is less than 0.001% of the CPS budget, so it shouldn't be too hard, but it would be great for Council to see those options and to be able to make a decision next Wednesday on whether it wants to move ahead with an on-ramp funding program for 2018. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Nussbaum. We're now going to get to the roadmap. So, as you know, I have declared a conflict, and Councillor Brockington was going to take the chair, but he has a childcare conflict of his own. He had to go pick up his kids. So, Councillor Nussbaum is going to take the chair and deal with items 2C and 5A first. And then, and I know Councillor Kakish has a question, and then I will return to the chair and we'll go through the rest of the roadmap.
Oh, the power. Amazing. Okay, so do we want to go to Councillor Kakish's question first before we vote on these elements of the budget?
We won't take a picture and send it to the mayor. We won't do that. My question was with regards to the recent announcement, I think was in October or November. How does that sort of flow in? How do those dollars flow into the budget? Because I know we were sort of done. And how does that impact the spaces, the childcare spaces next year?
Jason Sabourin is the manager of Children's Services. He used to be our financial services manager as well, so he's well equipped to answer this question.
Chair, basically just as a bit of context, the province did announce this funding and we had our contribution agreement signed with them at the beginning of September. So that funding was available beginning then. We have quickly ramped up looking at our wait list and placing children into the spaces. So to date, we've approximately served 200 additional children getting fee subsidies. And then on the wait list, there's approximately 500 that we've already assessed and added to their preferred providers list, and they have the ability to find childcare right now. And the other 500 children that are 0 to 6 on the wait list are going to be assessed by the end of the year for eligibility and added to their list as well. And then the 2018 funding, we're still waiting on the details from the province around what that can be used for.
Okay, so it's already been ongoing since that announcement with that waiting list. You've been working directly
Correct.
with
Since
the parents.
September, we have already been assessing new families and placing new families.
Okay, and so what is the number that there's 1,000 spaces for Ottawa?
There's 1,500 people currently on the wait list, if that's what you're referencing.
No, but the dollars that were given from the.
Oh, the 1,400. So with the 13.6 million that we received in 2017 from the province, that should serve an additional 1,400 children.
Okay, so we'd only have 100 left on the waiting list?
Correct. I mean, the wait list at the point in time is that. You never know the demand for the wait list. There could be more families coming because our community providers are really good right now with communicating with parents and advising them that there are more funds available. So we potentially will be serving more children with the expansion funding in 2018 if more families are looking for help with their childcare fees.
Okay, and that money strictly coming from the province, and there's some from the feds. There's nothing municipal matching or anything like that?
Correct.
Okay. Okay, thank you, Acting Chair.
Okay, so we're going to move to the roadmap, but we're just talking about the fact that since Councillor Brockington isn't here and he was the mover, I'm going to ask Councillor Fleury to move the two portions that I'm about to show him.
Okay, so that the Community and Protective Service Committee recommend that Council, sitting as Committee of the Whole, approve the Community and Protective Services Committee 2018 draft operating and capital budgets as follow. And I'll move to the point number 2, Community and Social Services budget as follow. And this is point number C, which is Children's Services as follow. I, user fees, page 47. Double I, Municipal Child Care Centers, page 45, and triple I, remaining operating resource requirements, page 45 and 46.
Okay.
And point 5A, which is Child Care Capital Budget, page 66, individual project listed on pages 120 and 123.
Is that correct? Correct. Okay.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Nussbaum, for that. And perhaps then you could move the motion here that the Community and Protective Services Committee, this one? Two of us.
Okay, so returning to the rest of the roadmap, that the Community and Protective Services Committee recommend that Council, sitting as Committee of the Whole, approve the Community and Protective Services Committee 2018 draft operating and capital budgets as follows. Item 1, Emergency and Protective Services budget.
So I think what we're going to do is I'm just going to take them as blocks. So 1, which is all Emergency and Protective Services budget, A through E. Can we carry that? Okay. So then 2, Community and Social Services budget, and we're going to separate out. Can I have that sheet back, Councillor Nussbaum? Yeah. Okay. We're going to approve everything except D1 and F1 because Councillor Shirelli has a conflict on those ones, so he'll leave the table for the rest of it. So can we approve the Community and Social Services budget? Carried. Okay, and then Councillor Shirelli, if you want to leave the table, can we approve D1 and F1? Carried? Carried, thank you. Moving on then to item number 3, Recreation, Cultural and Facility Services budget, A through E. Carried? Okay. Item number 4, Public Works Department Parks Operating Resource Requirement, page 65, carried. And then the Community and Protective Services Committee capital budget that has not already been carried. And that's it. Thank you all very much. So can we carry the CPS budget in its entirety? Carried? Thank you. Okay. So then returning to the agenda, are there any notices of motions? Inquiries? Go ahead, Councillor Drews.
Just if staff can talk to me after offline about the splash pad. I have a few other questions. I don't bring them here, but I can speak to them after if I can ask.
Okay, Mr. Chenier, maybe you could just speak with Councillor Drews. Okay, any other inquiries? Adjourned. And thank you to our staff and to all of you. I know it's been a long day. We appreciate all of your work. Thank you. It's going right this second. Did you tell her? Did you tell Jessica?